and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I are here for the final preview of the 2023-24 NHL regular season as we preview the Atlantic Division. And if you haven't listened to the previous divisions, go back, subscribe to the show, listen to those. They are absolute fire, unbelievable stuff from us. You like
absolute fire.
Our predictions obviously are all going to come true. So that's the beauty of it. So Justin, before we jump into it, how are you feeling about the Atlantic Division? Where would you rank the Atlantic Division in terms of top to bottom team? Like, let's combine all the teams. Like, where do you land here in terms of how it compares to the other divisions?
Yeah, so I would probably have to say that this is going to be the closest in terms of, maybe outside of Montreal, but like 1 through 7 is going to be tighter, I think, than any other division in this league. Maybe a close second, you could put the Pacific in there, but I think the bottom two teams in the Pacific are clearly bottom teams, whereas I think, you could make an argument for teams 1 through 7 here in the Atlantic to finish in almost any order. I say that we're you're obviously not putting Detroit or Ottawa at number 1, but still, there's arguments to be made for almost every team in here to finish at the top of this division.
And to be honest, out of all the really bad teams in the NHL that are, kind of in that rebuild mode, I look at Montreal and I think they're probably better than pretty much all those teams. Like with Suzuki and Caulfield and like a decent defense, they aren't that bad. They're almost in that like middling lower pack to me. Like they're going to finish last in this division without some crazy miracles happening, but they're I don't know that I look at their team and go, they're just desperate to lose. They're going to be last in the league. I still think they're not good. They're not a playoff team, but they are not the worst of the worst. Like I think both those bottom feeders in the Pacific between San Jose and Anaheim are worse than Montreal.
Oh, absolutely.
Philadelphia is worse than Montreal.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the nice thing for fans in Montreal is when you look at it, maybe you say, okay, cool, they'll have a couple more years of mediocrity being towards the bottom to get some really nice picks. But then when they're ready to make that push, right, similar to where we are maybe with those Ottawas, Buffaloes right now, in the next couple of years, Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, for example, are going to be right in their prime. They're going to be just ready to kill it for the next, 5-7 years. And same with, the defense. I think the only question mark I have with the rebuild is, what's the long-term vision as far as goaltending? But I think in this day and age, it would be easy for them to acquire a decent goaltender, through trades or, free agency.
Yeah, I've got no issue with Jake Allen or Montembeault from hey, you have a couple serviceable guys. They have their games. Like Jake Allen's not great, but he has his games. He's not necessarily going to lose you a lot of games. He's not going to win you many games, but he's not going to lose you a lot of games. So,
agreed.
I think that they're probably in as good of a spot as they can be for a team that is sort of not trying to lose, but it's like they're not trying to lose, but they're definitely not trying to win.
Right.
That's they're in a weird spot. I just don't know how I feel about Montreal because of that. You look beyond the goaltending, you look at their forward group and you go like, hey, Suzuki, Caulfield, Josh Anderson, not a bad starting 3 there. And you toss in Tanner Pearson, who they acquired in a trade, who looks like he's healthy. Kirby Dach, Alex Newhook is going to have an opportunity to kind of prove himself that he's a good top 6 forward. Sean Monahan kind of had a bounce back year. And then you're talking Slafkovsky, who, maybe he should end up in the minors when all is said and done. But if he doesn't, you're hoping he's in your top 6 and he's making an impact. I don't dislike this team's forward group. Are they a playoff forward group? No, but they're not you could make the playoffs with this forward group if you had a better defense and goaltending. So that's why I'm confused about what this team really is. Like, are you trying to win? Are you because we've got some good players here. But yeah, so Where are you with their defense? What do you think?
I mean, it's young, right? I mean, you look at the players they have, Jordan Harris, Justin Barron, right? A lot of young kids here that we don't really know what they are yet. And the thing I hate, obviously, right? I mean, you looked at Detroit, for example, right? We'll talk about them next. We knew Mo Sider was going to be something special when he was ready to be full-time in the NHL, right? They didn't have to rush him. I don't know about any of these defensemen, like what they're really going to be, what they may turn out to be, right? I mean, obviously, there's been hearsay and, various reports on where they think some of these guys could be. But I do get worried because there aren't, in my opinion, enough veteran guys here to help guide this young defense. And so you wonder, like, when they start seeing the losses pile up, right? You start going on those 4 or 5 game losing streaks, right? When you're just mentally drained and beat down, that's when you can see a lot of younger guys really just take a turn for the worse and hurt their development a little bit, where I like to see those veterans there to help make sure that these guys are still mentally focused, on the right path, and doing the right things when they're going through those tougher, stretches of games where they're just they can't get a bounce to go their way.
Yeah, really, it's Matheson and Savard, and then beyond that, there's not a whole lot of help. That's where you'd like to see. It doesn't have to be somebody who's even in your lineup every night, but you'd like to see somebody that can fill that roster out. Yeah, you need to sub in a guy and move in a veteran player to, yeah, exactly like what you're saying, just kind of steady the boat a little bit. They don't have that, and I mean it's probably a reason why they will not find great success this year. Although with their coach Marty St. Louis, he seems to be developing players in the right direction, and I think there's a chance that Montreal could finish like a little bit better than what we think. They could finish in maybe 7th. Well, I don't necessarily think on paper they're better than anyone in the division. I also think there are a few teams in the division that are like one more injury away from completely having the tires come off. I look at like Detroit. Detroit's going to be better. But what happens if Larkin goes down for some time, or DeBrincat, or if when they have injuries, it's not going to be nearly as pretty. Florida is already just decimated with injuries, and I think the start of their season is going to be Tough. Tampa Bay, I know they won their first game of the season against Nashville, but they're going to be in tough without Vasilevsky. I think that there's some potential for Montreal to, at least maybe not by the end of things, but during the first half of the season, to actually be in the conversation of, hey, they're not too bad.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. All right. I think it's safe to say we both have Montreal kind of securing that last spot in the division.
Yeah, no doubt there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the Detroit Red Wings. This is your baby right here. I know so there's some people who are like, I thought you said you were going to do a separate episode for the Wings and the Leafs. Well, we ran out of time. Things hit the fan, and here we are. We're including it all in the Atlantic. So we're going to do the Red Wings. We're going to, as much time as you want to spend on them, we will spend on the Wings. But let's just give me your first, your first reaction to where this team's going to go this year. Like, what are your expectations?
Boy, I mean, obviously you want to continually see them get a little bit better than they were last year, right? I mean, I think that's the plan with any kind of rebuild like this. You want to see constant improvement year in and year out. But I think they're a mystery, because when you see the drastic improvement that Buffalo made last year, right? I think with decent goaltending, they clearly would have been a playoff team, and it was obvious they took that next step.
They were kind of like New Jersey the year before. Where you're like, man, if they could just get some goaltending, they'd be in the playoffs. And then what do you know? New Jersey got goaltending, and they were in the playoffs.
Right. And they're poised to be, people are calling them a Stanley Cup contender now, right? So, who knows? Devin Levi
New Jersey.
comes in maybe.
You're talking about New Jersey, right?
Yes, okay. New Jersey, right? And yeah.
I was like, I don't know if I'm there on Buffalo yet.
Yeah, and again, maybe Devin Levi comes in now, and now that conversation next year we're having for Buffalo as we are with New Jersey right now. But with Detroit, it's almost like they're still crawling, and they're still trying to figure out how to walk yet. Because to me, like, obviously you have to bring in young pieces. You can't be a playoff contender. You can't be a Stanley Cup contender without drafting guys and building from within. And so, I've been waiting the last couple of years for them to make that turn. Obviously, we started seeing it slowly with Mo Seider coming in. Like guys like Michael Rasmussen, Lucas Raymond taking little steps here or there, and you hope maybe Lucas Raymond can bounce back from his sophomore slump. But I was expecting a few more younger guys to step up this season and get opportunities. And of course, Yzerman goes out and signs a few veterans, which is, okay in the short run. Like I love the Shane Gostisbehere signing. I think that's going to be huge, whether or not it means, just an improved power play and a great, third pairing defenseman to have and trade chip at the deadline potentially. Jeff Petrie, I think, was another great move to get in at a value contract with retained salary. But bringing in a guy like Justin Hall, not figuring out what to do with Ben Sherrod and Ole Mata, really. Those guys, yes, they might be good on your third pairing defensively, but, I would rather see a guy like, William Wallander or, Simon Edvinsson, who looked phenomenal in the preseason, come in and just, throw them into the Wolves and see what happens. Because essentially, that's what
they're coming up as soon as there's an injury. Especially Edvinsson, especially. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
He's coming back.
Yeah, but, with like Buffalo, right? I mean, out of necessity, they played Owen Powers, Rasmus Dahlin, and these guys kind of took it and went with it. And so if you really have legit superstars or legit stars on defense, right, they'll come in and they'll figure it out. And I think, between Jake Wallman, Jeff Petrie, Gostisbehere, they've got enough veteran guys back there to, pick up some of the slack if these younger guys just aren't clicking right away, right? So to me, it's just really like, when are we going to see that next wave of youngsters come in and guys like, David Perron, who's on an expiring contract, right? Is he going to get re-signed? Daniel Sprong, he's on their second power play unit, but to me, I'd rather see maybe a guy like Joe Veleno get a little bit more time there. But, again, I'm not coaching, I'm not GM for a reason, and we'll see what ultimately happens in the long term if it pays off, right? Because there were question marks surrounding the signing of a guy like JT Compher, right? I mean, you brought in Andrew Comp last year, and then essentially JT Compher is, a slightly better Andrew Kopp. So is it really that much of an improvement?
I think when I was looking at the fact that they kept 3 goaltenders says to me that, they needed to send Edvinsson down because he's not going to go on waivers, and they wanted to keep all 3 goaltenders, kind of figure out where they're at with that. They didn't want to lose Reimer or Lyon for nothing. So instead, they send down the defenseman. I'm certain that Edvinsson will be back, especially, once other teams figure out their goaltending situation, because the Wings are in a nice position where it's not a huge deal to send him down right now. They have some decent veteran depth. They basically have, it's like the opposite of Montreal. Too many veterans and not enough young guys. But I think once other teams figure out what they're doing in the goaltending position, and they can more easily slide one of those goalies down to the minors, I think that's where we see, that defenseman come back up, Edvinsson. And in the meantime, he just gets some time to develop in the minors. Like, there's nothing wrong with going back to the minors when you're 20 years old as a defenseman. It's not a problem.
Oh, no, not at all. And I mean, look, Mo Seider did it, and he turned out all right to me. So
turned out very all right.
Yeah, which now the debate is, right, what's his next contract going to look like? Because, we just saw Dahlin sign that 8x11 deal, and now everybody's just pointing the finger at Mo Seider. Obviously, he's not there as far as, the production and
not the same offensive juggernaut that Dahlin looks like he's going to be, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think he's still kind of going to be that like 50-point defenseman every year, which is still incredibly valuable. And I think that his defensive game may turn out to be better than Dahlin's in the long run.
Agreed.
All right. In that forward group, I know you're talking a lot about a lot of the veterans that have come up. There's one player in particular who I'm looking at as like, this has got to be the last hurrah if things don't go the way that everyone's expecting. I am expecting Michael Rasmussen to take that next step. He had a 15-goal season 2 years ago, almost 30 points in 56 games last year. Are we going to see a guy who can finally stay healthy, put up 45, maybe 50 points here, and really secure and lock his place into the top 6? Or is this a guy who, ultimately is just maybe a top 9 forward? He's going to play in the bottom 6 of that forward group for his career. And he's, is he going to be a $2 million player, or can he make himself into a $5 million player? Because that's really the crossroads that he's kind of in right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the Wings would like to see him be a 40 to 50 point guy, because if you can have one of those on your third line, that would be ideal, right? I think right now the Red Wings are expecting Robbie Fabry to be that top 6 guy, along with David Baron, Lucas Raymond, and DeBrincat on those wings. But hey, if Fabry's not working out, I think Michael Rasmussen is a great guy. You can interchange those 2 guys on the wing on the left side there and move them up between that middle 6 pair, line slots. And so, right now I just looking at daily faceoff, Rasmussen's not on any of the power play units. It looks like he's slated to start on that third line with Andrew Kopp and Daniel Sprong, which, again, he's a big guy. So, I think with his silky hands and his size, he could potentially blow up to be, just a really good piece for this middle 6 line in Detroit here. So, ideally, if the Wings end up having to pay him, $4 or $5 million, I don't think that's anything they'd be upset about. Given
if he had a great season this year, yeah, absolutely. Here's my issue with Detroit. I like what they've done in terms of essentially creating quite a bubble for themselves with the players that they've brought in: Kopp, Comfer, Perron, Daniel Sprong, these guys over the last 2 years that they brought in. And I'm not including DeBrincat on purpose. So they brought these guys in that essentially that make them bubble proof. Like if one of those guys goes down, or if Larkin goes down, they do have players that can play up in the lineup. Comfer proved he can play up. He can play with the big boys. He's not going to put up huge point totals, but he can definitely, he could limit the damage of losing a really good player higher up in the lineup. So the Wings have created for themselves a nice bubble where they're not going to be bad. I just don't know, aside from DeBrincat and Larkin, where the game breakers are. It's almost like they are kind of in that New York Islanders vibe. Now they're much younger, but the Islanders have a lot of decent players who, they play a certain system. They're able to win games, but their game breakers were certainly low. Like they didn't have a lot of guys where you could just go out there, score a goal, which is why they traded for Horvat. I still think they need another one. That's besides the point, but Detroit still doesn't have those guys. Now I know Raymond is the one that everybody's looking at like, bro, it's time to get going. I mean, he's only 21. He's still on his ELC, only 21, but I know he's kind of the guy that everyone's looking at going, when are you going to become the game breaker, score 30 goals or more? At this point, I think he'd be happy if he scored 25. But that is what is missing from this lineup. Aside from, of course, DeBrincat and Larkin, more or less DeBrincat. Like I think DeBrincat should go out and score 40 goals this season and get back to that pace. I just don't see where the other game breakers are. And I think that's what Detroit's missing. It's kind of what they've been like screwed out of by every time the lottery comes. It just doesn't go their way. But I'm waiting for that extra game breaker that they really, really need to keep pace with the rest of this division. This division has too many players that can score at will, and there's not many of them on Detroit. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think, obviously DeBrincat and Larkin on that top line is great. But you look at, I look at the rest of this lineup and I say, this kind of reminds me of a poor man's Seattle Kraken lineup right now, where you have a lot of guys that used to be middle 6 guys that, kind of took the opportunity and ascended a little bit, played a little bit better, and ultimately propelled Seattle into the playoffs. I don't know if, the players that Detroit has right now are capable of taking those next steps, because they had opportunity on their
previous teams to do that. And while they did in a little, respect, I think they've kind of topped out as far as what we can expect to see from them.
Topped out. Oh, you said topped out.
Topped out, yeah.
They copped out.
But I wonder, though, maybe looking, I just, took a quick peek at next year's free agent class next summer's, and I wonder if Yzerman is just sitting here waiting to snag one of these guys. And when I say one of these guys, I'm looking at William Nylander, Jake Gensel, Steven Stamkos, or maybe even Tyler Toffoli, these guys who put up 30-plus goals every year, and maybe hoping that one of those guys can come in, slot in on that second line without any questions, and be that line driver that they desperately need on that second line.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't think that can be a strategy. The strategy can't be, well, we'll get someone else's guy when he becomes a free agent, because it just so very rarely works. It certainly
and maybe
can happen.
The fallback is trade, right? If one of these guys aren't available, then we'll make a deal and bring somebody in.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's also, can Marco Kasper, can he become that game breaker that you need? Is Lucas, the time is not up on Lucas Raymond. Certainly he has time still to continue to develop. But yeah, all in all, I like where Detroit's going. I like their depth. I think they've got, they did it the right way to protect their young players. Like, hey, very easily you could have, Soderblom played a little bit last year. Jonathan Berggren, he was up there for a little bit last year as well, and for 67 games, and they both played pretty well, and they're both finding themselves in the minors. So I think they're in a great position, because at any point in the season you can go, you know what, we're just going to bring these guys up, like cap be damned, or like, yeah, hey, we're going to put somebody on waivers who's actually making some money, and if we lose them, so be it, because our young guys are playing so well. I like that they have the options to do that. And on top of that, you've got Zach Aston Reese in the minors, who is always good for a call up, and I'm sure he'll find his way onto the roster. But Detroit's in a good position. If they have any injuries, they're not going to fall off too much. And I think that's important, and there certainly will be opportunities for their youngsters. I guess the last thing to really talk about is their goaltending. Outside of Husso, how are you feeling? How are we feeling about James Reimer right now? Alex Lyon.
Well, I like Alex Lyon. I think he's a good goaltender to have, potentially be your number 3 or even number 2 goaltender. I have no issues with what they have, because if James Reimer is shit in the bucket, or gets hurt, which he often does, Alex Lyon is a great goaltender, I think, to have be your number 2. You look at,
I think for the most part, Alex Lyon had a healthy 15 games there with the Panthers. Outside of that, he really has not been that good. He's been very below average throughout the rest of the time that he's found himself playing. Now, granted, he's never played, outside of last year, he had never played more than 11 games in a season. So it's not as if he's really got an opportunity to get into the groove. So I'm willing to give him that.
No, and he's played with some very poor defensive teams in Philly. But what I will say is, you look at his numbers in the AHL, they've always been pretty respectable. So no matter where he ends up, I think he's still going to give you quality goaltending. Maybe not, he wouldn't be that backup, like, for example, when we look at Tampa Bay, right, when we have question marks, right, about their backup. And now even more so, because now, he's thrust into the spotlight. And, I think there's some security in having a veteran guy like Reimer there, who is going to be good for, maybe, guys like, maybe 20, 15 games, whatever. And you can play Alex Lyon another 10 games and then give Ville Husso 50, 55. And I think that's it's not a bad way to go about it. And to me, I don't think there's anything wrong with Detroit's goaltending. I like that they don't have guys signed long-term beyond a couple of years, because I'm hoping that, eventually in 2 years, Sebastian Cossa is ready to make that leap.
All right. And give me your thoughts on where Detroit's going to actually finish.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think everybody's pretty much, that I've read online. Every prediction has got Detroit at 7, Montreal at 8. But I'm putting Detroit at 6. I think they'll finish 6th in this division. I do think there is one team who finished ahead of them last year that is going to fall down to that 7th spot.
Okay, all right. Looking forward to finding out who that team is, which we'll find out here in a second. All right, so let's move on to our next team. Unless of course, if I missed anything with the Wings, I want to give you the opportunity to say. Okay, all right. Let's continue our trek upwards through the old standings, and we're moving on to the Ottawa Senators who finished 3rd last, 6th in this division last year. I'll just start off by saying for the Senators that they're in a tricky position from maybe where we would have talked about them at the draft, going, all right, we've got Stützle, Norris, and Pinto, 1, 2, 3 at center. Pretty great. Now, Josh Norris, who knows when he's going to play, and Shane Pinto still unsigned. They've got to make some kind of move here, and they have all but $62,000 in cap space right now. My guess is that with Norris going on IR, if they actually do engage that and put him on IR, which it certainly sounds like they will have the room for Pinto. And then it's just going to depend on what they're willing to pay him. And I'm looking over at none other than Jamie Drysdale kind of deal because they are in the same position. They are both the 10.2C RFA, where they can't be offer sheeted. And that was Jamie Drysdale as well because of the lack of games last season. So I'm looking at a similar deal. I'm sure Ottawa's like, no, we're not giving you a 1-year deal. No way. Because, of course, I'm sure Pinto would be willing to take a 1-year deal. But Ottawa probably wants him to take a little bit longer of a deal so that they have all that locked up. But where are you with this team without Pinto, without Norris? Now, hey, this could be different tomorrow. He could sign, but right now, as far as we know, he has not signed.
Yeah, and there's really been no indication on, what kind of deal he's even looking at, right? I mean, I think we knew with, for example, Trevor Zegras, right? We kind of knew what the term was going to be like. We had a decent idea what kind of dollars he was going to kind of fall under. And ultimately, it kind of panned out pretty close to that. Now, there's always a little bit of smoke before the fire, but with this one, there's really no smoke. And I worry that any long-term absence from both Pinto and Norris is really going to have, there's nothing good that comes out of it. But, Ottawa has traditionally been a team that just has slow starts, right? I mean, it's year 5 of the DJ Smith era, and they never seem to get hot.
Has it been 5 years already?
Yeah, this is his 5th year.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
I know. And to me, if there's any coach that's on the hot seat, he is probably the coach on the hottest of seats. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have to make the playoffs, but I think they have to be
in the mix
close
the whole time. You better, if you don't make the playoffs, you better miss it by like less than 5 points.
Yes, absolutely.
Be in the mix the whole time. Yeah. And especially given new ownership where like they have no ties to him. It just is, hey, we'll bring in the guy that we know and like.
Right. And they're about to spend a bunch of money to build a new stadium for this team and build an entertainment district. I think they said something like $5 billion. Who knows?
That's it?
That's it, right? Yeah. But all that money they're going to spend, right? They want results right now. This team is ready to push. They've got the young pieces. And Giroux's not getting any younger. So you want to strike while the iron's hot. And who knows if Tarasenko's going to be around next year or if they can go out and sign anybody similar to a team like Detroit that could really use another line driver. So, they already lost, to Brinket. You don't want to have to lose another guy, this offseason and have to go in next season even more shorthanded.
Well, I guess it's probably fair to say Tarasenko is DeBrinket's replacement. And honestly, as far as the production goes, from last year, I don't think there'll be a huge difference because DeBrinket really didn't fit. it just was, he had that down year. And I think,
and what if Tarasenko doesn't fit, right? That production could dip even more.
That's true. Yeah, Tarasenko, I mean, he had, 18 goals in 69 games last year and 50 points. So, I mean, I would think that Tarasenko will be in a, I guess I'm hoping he fits, because I think that the idea of like him and Giroux together just makes me happy for some reason. I don't know. I look at the forward group and I like what I see outside of that center position with people being hurt. Or being unsigned and hurt. My issue here is like, all right, let's just assume Pinto's going to get done. By the way, they did offer him 1 year, $1 million, and he rejected it, which I probably would too. He put up 35 points last year. How are you going to give him $1 million?
Yeah, it's at least $2 to $3 million right there. So
I understand that he's you don't have leverage, no team can offer sheet you, but you kind of need Shane Pinto. And I guess, like, when I look at this, I go, I mean, you're going to get the cap space from Norris, but also there's got to be somebody that you can just kind of shoo away a little bit here. Like, if you have to replace somebody, I don't know. Yeah, I guess
Matthew Joseph. See you later.
Yeah, but he just signed for 3 years. That's going to be tough. I mean, that seems like Kubalik maybe is a guy you'll have to move.
Yeah, but Kubalik, man, he's going to give you 20 goals on that third line. Like that's you
true.
Can't afford to lose that.
That's true. I guess you look at it and you go, all right, well, like Rourke Chartier, who's making $775, if that goes away, well, that's basically they have like $800,000. So it's going to be really, really tricky for them to fit him, other than Josh Norris coming back. But then what do you do when Josh Norris is healthy? That's going to be your other issue.
Well, so here's the thing right now.
They're already going 17 players tonight.
Well, that's the thing, right? They're shorthanded regardless. So if somebody goes down where it's not a long-term injury, right, and you have to call somebody up, I mean, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, it's a beautiful lesson in cap management, or mismanagement, I guess, by Pierre Dorian. I mean, they do have, like, they've got some great value contracts, though. I like what he's done in terms of signing the price point that he's signed players at. But yeah, there's just not enough cap space to go around, I guess. It's that it's that Josh Norris deal that's just killing him right now.
I'll bet.
Where do you land with this? New goaltending and Jonas Korpisalo. Jake Sanderson signed to a big deal after playing like 6 games. So, and I'm in jest, but where do you land with this team actually finishing?
Yeah, I mean, I do think this team is going to finish better defensively. I think their goaltending to me is a little improved. I think their defense is obviously improved when you get a full year of Sanderson, who I think is going to be a home run, and in a couple of years make that contract look very valuable. But ultimately, I think they're going to struggle to score goals and be a cohesive unit to start the season. They're probably going to get off to another slow start, in my opinion. And I do think, given the expectations coming into this year, I think there's a very short leash for DJ Smith. And if ownership comes in and says, you know what, it's just not working, let's go out and get a guy like Bruce Boudreau, right, to come in and who always seems to, rejuvenate teams wherever he goes. They may pull the plug pretty quick. And ultimately, I just think there's going to be a lot of rocky ups and downs for this team, and there's just not going to be any consistency, especially, Tarasenko. I have this gut feeling he's just not going to fit in well there, or at least with DJ Smith to begin the season. And so because they're going to get off to a slow start, and I think with teams like Buffalo, Detroit trying to jump them and stay in front of them in the standings, ultimately I think Ottawa's going to be my number 7 team. Okay.
I think with a healthy Shabbat, that's very important. I think that was a big thing when he went down last year that really hurt them. I know it was he missed 14 games, but I think those 14 games are very important when you need every single game to have an opportunity. I think health in general is just going to be an absolute premium for the Ottawa Senators. They have to stay healthy. when I talked about Detroit and I said I didn't think they had too many game breakers, I think that Ottawa has more game breakers than Detroit. Their defense is better. I like their goaltending a little bit better from top to bottom as well. But I don't think they have the same amount of depth. If one guy goes down, I don't know where the next guy's coming from. Whereas Detroit, it's like, well, if one guy goes down, there's somebody that you can call up and slide in pretty seamlessly, especially because you've got a couple guys in the minors that played most of the season in Detroit last year who put up like 30 to 40 point seasons in the bottom six. So they're in a good position from a depth standpoint. Ottawa is not, and I think you're right. Like if there's any injury problems, which there already is with Norris, this could be really messy really quick because, shoot, if I'm an Ottawa Senators fan, like you have to make the playoffs this year. And if you don't make the playoffs, you better miss it like on the last day of the season. Like I need to be fully engaged all year long or I'm going to be pissed and heads need to roll. Pierre Dorian fired, DJ Smith fired. That would be where I would land if I'm a Sens fan. Ultimately, though, I think that they've got enough here to where they will be in the mix for most of the year. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to do anything at the deadline. I think they're so up against the cap. I'm not sure if that's possible, but if there's any injury to Norris and it's long term, then they would have plenty of space. I hesitate to put this team into the playoffs because I'm just not sure who they're going to jump, but they could do it. Like this could be a year that they make the playoffs. Things need to go right, and thus far, not much seems to be going right from behind the scenes from a Shane Pinto standpoint and from an injury standpoint with Josh Norris. So I'm respectfully, hesitantly saying, yeah, this team could finish 5th in the division. That could be a playoff team. That might not be a playoff team. With how good the Metro is, it probably isn't. But I think they finish 5th in the division.
5th, okay.
And I don't know if I said that I think Detroit finishes in 6th, but that's where I have Detroit in 6th.
You didn't? No. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that.
I have Detroit in 6th, yes.
I don't know who's in your 7th spot yet, so I can't wait to hear that.
No, you don't. Well, yeah, you don't know who I have. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, yes, we can look forward to that someday. Someday. All right. Next up is the Buffalo Sabres. I think it's like the Buffalo Sabres are in year 5, maybe like year 6. The Senators are in year 5 and the Red Wings are in year 4. Like it seems like they're all a few years, like a year apart in terms of how they should be progressing. And like last year, Buffalo almost made the playoffs. And I think that's what you want to see from Ottawa, almost make the playoffs. And what you want to see from Detroit is like make an effort and be there for most of the way. And that's where I think Ottawa was last year. So I think they're kind of all on the same kind of progression. They're just 1 year behind each other. It would be devastating if Buffalo doesn't make the playoffs this season. And I mean, they've got all the pieces to do it. At this point, I think that they've done a really nice job developing their players. They didn't do a ton in terms of adding players in the offseason, especially in their forward group, but they're just going to give this group the opportunity to go out and do what they need to do. And I also really like the addition of Connor Clifton.
Yeah.
On defense.
I can't argue with that. I mean, I think they did a great job of bringing in some veteran guys like Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson to kind of sort that defense. Because really, I mean, outside of goaltending, right, we knew Devin Levi was coming, so they really didn't have to do too much there.
And I actually don't mind Eric Comrie for a backup standpoint.
Oh, no, not at all. I like the three-headed monster they're going to roll into the season with, right? Comrie's experienced enough. I think he brings a great veteran present for some of these younger guys like UPL and Devin Levi. But
yeah, if I can't say Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen at least once per show, I get pretty agitated. So I need him to stay up with the big club.
Yeah, but now bringing in a guy like Connor Clifton and even to a lesser extent Eric Johnson kind of takes a little bit of pressure off of Owen Power, right? You don't have to rely on him as heavily anymore. I mean, not necessarily that they're not going to. I think they're still going to push him to, he is that number 2 defenseman for this team, and they'll play him accordingly. But if he struggles a little bit, you don't have to freak out and say, oh shit, we're totally screwed now. Like, we don't have anybody else on defense, right? I mean, Matthias Samuelsson, he's fine defensively, but he's not going to produce offensively at all for you. We knew that. So this just adds a little bit of cushion for them, and Connor Clifton can be a guy who's very, very serviceable at the top of your lineup, or wherever else you feel like putting him. So
yeah, it just takes away some of the responsibilities on special teams from Owen Power. Like, you don't have to put out your young guys on the penalty kill every time, because you've got these veteran guys that can go out and do it. I think that's important too. Like, Connor Clifton is going to see a lot of PK. Yeah. And and so is Matthias Samuelsson. I mean, Dahlin and Power will certainly be out there, but you don't want to have to feel like you have to leave those guys out there longer than you should. And you want their time to be spent on the power play, because that's where they're going to put up their points. That's where their talent is going to be utilized the best. And that's where you want them to have the energy to put into, is that power play. So I'm looking forward to seeing exactly what this power play can do, because, I mean, shoot, Tage Thompson, I really still like Victor Olofsson. I think he's got a nice shot. I think he can still kind of slide in all up and down your lineup, sort of. He's not a Swiss Army knife kind of player, but he is a player who can play with almost anyone and still just score goals. I don't know I'd call him a game breaker, but he is a guy that can score at any point. Like, he's not going to score a ton of goals. He's going to score 20 goals, but he's somebody who is reliably, he's going to score wherever he is in your lineup. He's going to score 20 goals.
Yeah, he's a poor man's Alex Tuck.
True, and they have Alex Tuck. So,
right.
So that helps.
Yeah, which this guy, I mean, he might have the best contract in the NHL right now. I mean, maybe outside of Connor Bedard, but we won't talk about that. So,
well, yeah, and that's just not a fair one. Yeah,
no. But I mean, look, Alex Tuck is I think he's going to continue to be a beast here. They've got just incredible depth at the forward group, and it's a bevy of riches when you've got to me, a potential stud forward in Zach Benson, who I think is going to be a phenomenal top 6 forward at some point. You've got the luxury of putting him in there, and Jack Quinn, whenever he comes back, I think he's still going to be a great third line piece to have there. And so when you don't have to worry about replacing a guy like Jack Quinn, right? Like, where am I going to get those 30, 40 points from? They've got enough depth up front to do that and fill in where they need to with guys like Casey Middlestad and like you mentioned, Victor Olofsson. These guys can slide up and down the lineup, no problem. So, really the question mark is Devin Levi going to come as advertised? Because if he's as good as people think he's going to be, or even pretty dang close to it, there's no question in my mind this team is a playoff team.
Okay. Yeah, I was just looking at the power play percentages from last year. Buffalo finished 9th last year, 23.4%. I think that's going up just with the maturity of their defensemen, especially Dahlin and Power. I think that's going to go up. Just an interesting tidbit about the Atlantic Division. They have, in the top 10 of last year's power play, they have 5 teams in there.
Wow.
And in the top 12, they have 6. So half the league in the top 12 is in the Atlantic Division for power play percentage. That's pretty darn good.
Not too shabby.
So, yeah, I'm looking at them. I think their power play is going to be better. I think the one area where I would be concerned is the goaltending. Like, sure, Devin Levi played really well. I'll give him that. He played well in the couple games that he got up there. So if Devin Levi falters, this team's in big trouble, because I don't think an Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, Eric Comrie group is going to get it done. And, well, I don't think Devin Levi is going to just go away. I think that there's a chance that, maybe the few games that he got into aren't going to be the reality for the entire year. This may take a little bit of time. I mean, even the 7 games he got into, he was still a .905 save percentage. It's not like he was a world beater. So that's what I'd be concerned with is, can they get the goaltending, or are we looking at a New Jersey Devils situation where they just don't get as good of goaltending as we hoped?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's reason for cautious optimism here. But you know what? I do think if there is, a little bit of a skid, Eric Comrie can hold the fort for, 5-7 games, whatever, maybe you need him to. But a long stretch, they'll be in real trouble.
Yeah. Other than that, I mean, this forward group seems like it's a playoff team. They seem ready. Tage Thompson, you talk about maybe the best deal in hockey. It might be that Tage Thompson deal. He's only at less than $8 million for what he's going to put on the table. I mean, he's probably going to score 50 goals this year. Could push it for 100 points. He's a discount, a nice bargain deal for the Sabres as well. They're in a good spot. All $8.8 million in cap space. And we're talking about them being a playoff team. There might not be another team in the NHL that we're pretty sure are going to be at least like playoff contention. I'll say I've got the Buffalo Sabres. I'm hesitant. I'm kind of between that 3 and 4 spot for the Buffalo Sabres. But if they finish 4, I think they're in the playoffs. Like, I don't think this is a situation where only 3 teams make the playoffs from the Atlantic. So either way, I'm sold on them being in the playoffs, whether that's in the 3 or the 4 spot. Doesn't really matter. I think they'd just be happy to get in. But you look at the other teams who are in a similar, like, hey, they could make the playoffs. There's nobody with the kind of cap space the Buffalo Sabres have. Maybe the Red Wings with 5.1, but I don't think that the expectation for the Red Wings isn't like we're making the playoffs. If they do, great, but I don't see it. Next most, probably the Seattle Kraken at 2.8 and the Carolina Hurricanes 2.7. But the Sabres at 8.8, they literally can do anything this next year at the deadline. They can acquire anybody. They will have no issues fitting them under the cap. And that is something also to consider. This is going to be a team, they haven't made the playoffs in 12 years. They are going to probably be willing to do a little bit at the deadline to end that streak. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, you look at like some of the pieces they could bring in, maybe a Jason Zucker and Adam Henrique, guys that, veteran guys who can put up, 20 plus goals. So that's value to have right there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Where do you have the Buffalo Sabres finishing?
Yeah, I've got them finishing 3rd in this division.
Okay. I like it. I love I love it.
Now I don't have Devin Levi being like 929 save percentage. I think he finishes in 910, 9teens, that low area there, but it's better than last year. And I think defensively they're improved that much better, where I think, he doesn't have to be all worldly to get them in the playoffs.
Okay. Like I said, I've got them between the 3 and the 4 spot. I think, based on the other things going on in this division, other teams maybe taking a little step back. I'm hesitant on that goaltending. I think I'm going 4. I think I'll stick the Sabres in the nice wild card position. But I think they'll be first wild card spot. I think they're going to be decently ahead of that other wild card position, where last game of the season kind of thing, we're not worried about the Sabres making the playoffs. We know that it's a foregone conclusion.
Hey, they're getting in. That's all that matters.
They're getting in. What was it that I said about Philadelphia, that they were a lock that one year? I won't say that about anybody anymore, because I feel terrible. I feel like I caused that. I caused them to miss the playoffs. Okay, let's go to the Florida Panthers as our 5th team in this division. They finished 4th last year in just barely squeaking in last game of the season. The Pittsburgh Penguins absolutely dumped the bed and lost to the Chicago Blackhawks, just like they did last night. And they find themselves in the playoffs. Of course, they take it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, an unbelievable run. That Stanley Cup final run, I believe, has cost them a few players here coming into the regular season, and I'm not sure their health status. With what? Who are we talking? We're talking about Montour
and Aaron
Ekblad. I mean, that's a big hit. You've got Spencer Knight just doesn't seem to be able to find himself. That hurts.
He's starting
too.
in the minors.
Starting in the minors, and it means you've got Anthony Stolarz, who's not horrible, but like I worry about, Bobrovsky needs a break. It's pretty clear. Like he benefits from not playing often. So I'm worried there. They tried their best to patch this up. They bring in Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, who was on the Panthers in the past, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And I just look at this defense, Josh Mahura, Nico Mikkola, who's fine, turning out to be a decent top 4 defenseman, and then Gustav Forsling. Their defense is maybe the worst in this entire division right now without Ekblad and Montour. Now, that's not going to be the case forever, but find me a defense that you would take Florida's defense right now, as they are currently healthy, over another team in this division.
Boy, they're neck and neck there with Montreal, but I might.
And that's Montreal's a really bad place to be.
Yeah, I might take Montreal's just because they got a lot of younger guys that have potential that we don't know about.
Right. And Oliver Ekman-Larsson, I think, is a tease. Like, he's a shell of himself. So take away his name and just put his stats there, and you're cringing. I think the Stanley Cup run was a beautiful thing for the Florida Panthers. I think the start of this season is going to be really tough. As far as we know, Matthew Tkachuk's fully healed from what happened to him with the hip last year. But anytime you're talking big things like that, like a hip, I just wonder if that's going to rear its ugly head again. It's like a hip, a back, those things. Not like, oh, all right, you tweaked your knee. Like those things heal and you move on from them. But your back, your hip, man, those are just some big things in the body that need to go. And if they don't, it's going to be a problem.
Well, that's the thing. I think looking at that injury from the Stanley Cup final last year, we kind of figured out if Matthew Tkachuk is out of the equation, this team's in real trouble. Not to mention, so they bring in Evan Rodriguez, which I think was a good grab, but he, to me, is more or less a middle six guy right now. He's slated to take that Anthony Duclair spot on that top line on the right wing, and so no Duclair scoring goals for them. I don't know if Rodriguez is really a goal scorer, so you don't have that. And then Sam Bennett is day-to-day, and Paul Maurice came out. I mean, Sam Bennett was in a walking boot on Saturday, not going to play the opening night, apparently, and Paul Maurice said, quoted, longer than day-to-day, So
week to week.
Yeah, wouldn't say week to week, but regardless, you think at least he's going to miss, if you think maybe 3 to 4 games, right? You just put it conservatively at that, and without this defense, I mean, they could dig themselves a huge hole really, really quickly.
And I get it. They dug themselves a huge hole last year and they still made the playoffs, but that is the exception to the rule. Like, you're not doing that twice. I'm sorry, you're not doing that twice.
No, and don't get me wrong, Bobrovsky was great in the playoffs, but I just don't have faith in him to do anything remotely close like that in the regular season.
Yeah, and also, hey, Barkov, still a premier center in the league. I think this is a year where everyone's going to want to just go, can we just forget about this year, not overreact, and just move on? I think that the Florida Panthers are going to finish 7th in this division.
Oh,
they're the team that I have down in 7th.
Okay,
I think they're going to fall.
I have them at 5th, right above Detroit, but I mean, it's going to be a pretty. I mean, I don't think they'll be completely bottomed out, but I do think they.
No, I just think this division is too good.
But I agree with you, and I think that we're going to look at this team like Vegas from a couple years ago, where they missed the playoffs, and
could win the cup the next year. Everybody's healthy, could win the cup.
Absolutely, and the nice thing is they have. Sam Reinhart, he's a UFA, so who knows? Do they get him re-signed? But they've got a lot of defensemen that are going to be UFAs. So maybe next year they have a little bit more cap space to work with, and they bring in a few pieces, and now they're a cup contender again.
There you go. Yep, I think this is just the price of doing business, of making it to the Stanley Cup Finals and losing. You just they gave everything they had, and unfortunately, I think it's going to cost them this season. Which, to be honest, even though they didn't win it, boy, I think I'd be willing to take that. If you told me like, hey, the Leafs will make the finals, but they have to miss the playoffs the next year, I'd be like, that's fine.
Right.
that's fine with me. They'll make it again. So yeah, the one thing they do have some cap hit or some cap space available because of the injury. So maybe they know that Ekblad's coming back. So it's a tricky situation. He's not out for the year or anything. So you got to be thinking about that. But yeah, I think the Florida Panthers unfortunately they just took a bullet last year in the finals, and it's going to cost them, and they're going to fall much further than expected. I also think that it could cause them, here at the deadline, maybe they just go, hey, well, we're just going to trade off a few of these guys, try to grab some assets. And I don't think they're trading Sam Reinhart. Don't mistake that. But I think, maybe you go, well, we can trade Mike Riley and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and maybe they have a little bit of a bounce back year. They're a little better, so teams are willing to give up a 4th or a 3rd round pick, and Florida can maybe recoup some of the assets that they've lost, dealing their 1st round picks for the next 6 years and for the next 2. But so yeah, I think maybe a Nick Cousins could be a guy that you deal, and I think that's a possibility if the Panthers are out of the mix at that point. So okay, you said you had them finishing 5th. I have them finishing 7th, so we're good there. Let's move on to the team that finished 3rd, and that is the Tampa Bay Lightning, who ultimately lost in the first round to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they are without their superstar goaltender Andrei Vasilevsky, and they will be for the first 6 to 8 weeks, I think is the vibe that I'm getting. So where do you see this team going without Vasilevsky? They already won one game.
Yeah, he didn't look too bad either, and in the preseason too, a couple of shutouts there. So maybe he's got a chip on his shoulder, saying, "You know what? Hey, all the doubters, I'm gonna go out and prove you wrong, right?" But
Jonas Johansson.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think this team is so well coached. I think they have between Sergachev, Hedman, and Cernak, they've got a good defensive group in front of him. I think they'll play. They might have to adjust their game a little bit to be a little bit more structured in front of him and protect the goaltender a little bit more. But you know what? I think they brought in some guys like Luke Glendening, Tyler Mott in the bottom line there who can play some good defensive minutes. And I think between guys like Nicholas Paul, who scored a couple goals last night, I think they've got enough depth at the forward group. Still, it's not as pretty as it was a couple of years ago when they were winning cups, but I think there's enough there. And given where, we talked about teams like Boston and, Florida, who are inevitably I'm sure you think Boston's going to take a step back. I can't imagine you wouldn't. But I think there's enough there for them to keep this goaltending protected to where they can stay in the mix and be good enough in, that top 3 or 4 spot long enough to where when, Vasi comes back, where they can then say, you know what, we're going to put the pedal down a little bit more now and play our game, right?
Yeah, assuming health, their defense is just too good.
Right.
They're so good. Sergachev and Hedman at the top of Cernak and Radish, like they're in a good enough position to where, I don't think that they fall too far. I don't know that they're a team that wins around in the playoffs right now, but I think that they're still a playoff team. One thing that could hurt them, I was back and forth Buffalo 3-4. That's because I'm back and forth with Tampa being 3-4. The one thing that I think could hurt them is if this Steven Stamkos drama continues. If anything weird happens and you say we're dealing you at the deadline or something, like, I don't know. I doubt that. I can't see it happening, but I think that drama hopefully ends soon. Hopefully they take care of him and keep him there for the rest of his career. That's, I think, what I want to see. I don't want to see Steven Stamkos in another jersey unless he's like 38 and, going after one more cup. I'm fine with that stuff. But
like the Mike Modano.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I'm fine with that. But Steven Stamkos, that drama could hurt. But I think that, again, they're like so well coached, so professional that I think they'll be able to find their way through that. I think it's just kind of another hum-ho regular season for Tampa. Other than Vasilevsky being out, it'll just this team just steps up when faced with adversity. I'm not really worried about him being out for 2 months. Now, if he was out for 4 or 5, all right, then I'm worried. But I think they can weather the storm and play their hearts out for the first 2 months. It might actually be good for them to have to come in knowing that they have to play a certain way because they don't have Vasilevsky back there. It might be good for them in the long run, and then they'll get him back, and maybe they're playing better defensive hockey in front of Vasilevsky, and who knows what it does for them. But I think ultimately, I think they still finish third, and we're looking at something similar to what we saw last year in the playoffs. Someone playing Tampa Bay in that spot.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, gosh, can't they just call up Carolina? I mean, Peter Kochenkov got loaned to their minor league team.
Right.
Can't they just say, hey, can we just use him in the big league instead?
Can we just borrow him for a few games? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Where do you have Tampa finishing?
Yeah, ultimately, I think assuming that guys stay healthy, especially in this forward group and between their top defensive unit there, I think that they'll get in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to push too hard with Vasi. I think they're going to kind of adjust their game a little bit to not be full throttle offense and shot blocking all the time. I think they'll probably finish in 4th, right behind Buffalo, and I think they'll get in the playoffs. It won't be like a scary situation where oh man, are they going to get in? They're going to miss by a few points. No, I think they'll get in without an issue there in that 4 spot. And
if you remember last year, they were kind of out of the playoffs for a second there.
Yeah, and that might happen for a little while here, but ultimately I think they're just too good. They're too good of a veteran group to miss the playoffs. I think they'll get in. I do have my reservations about Tanner Jeannot, the price they had to pay for him, and whether or not he's actually going to produce. But
he's on their 4th line, so that tells me what they think of him.
Yeah, we'll see there. But I think guys like Brandon Hagel, Nicholas Paul, Anthony Cirelli, these guys are still going to produce and play well enough to get them in.
All right. Let's move on to the Leafs. I want to move on to the Leafs.
You want to skip Boston?
Well, Boston finished first in the division. So
I'm sorry. Yeah. I thought we were going to save Toronto for last, but maybe that was my brain.
Okay.
So.
We'll do Boston for last. That's okay.
Okay.
We're sticking. We can't divert from the order now. We're on team number 31 of 32. We have to do it. Yeah, Toronto Maple Leafs, biggest thing in their offseason, of course, re-signing Austin Matthews. There's no drama. He signs to a 4-year deal, so he's locked in there. They signed Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, Ryan Reeves, and and John Klingberg. And then surprise out of camp, Fraser Minton makes the big squad because he had such a darn good opening, preseason. So, yeah, the Leafs are in a pretty good position from a depth standpoint, feeling good because anytime a 19-year-old can come in and make this team, like this forward group, he cracks that roster, you're in a pretty darn good spot. Because that means, other guys are falling behind, but that's okay. Like, you still have Pontus Holmberg, you've got Nicholas Robertson, you've got Nick Abruzzi and Alex Steves, you've got other players in the minors who can play. So there's a lot there in terms of depth. And I guess from you have watched Tyler Bertuzzi for almost his entire career, or his entire NHL career. You've been watching him as a Wings fan. How do you see him fitting in that top line with Matthews and Marner? Can he hang?
Well, oh, absolutely. Yeah. We know, if you want to talk first and foremost about speed, right? The speed of the game, how fast, a lot of guys are, especially at that high end talent level. Like guys like Matthews have, where they think fast, they move fast, their feet are always going, and they're always 2 steps ahead of other guys that aren't in that superstar realm. Bertuzzi was able to hang with a guy like Dylan Larkin, who in my mind, he's not a superstar, but he's a star player, and really didn't slow down. And Tyler Bertuzzi, the great thing is he's always willing to go in those dirty areas. He's always willing to go to the front of the net, take that cross check, that extra hit to make a play happen. Which is going to be so valuable, I think, for guys like Austin Matthews, Marner, Nylander, whomever he's paired with, to really help them thrive a little bit more. And I think when we looked at guys like Zach Hyman, Michael Bunting, and what they brought to the table, I think Tyler Bertuzzi is better at all of those things than they were, right? I mean, whatever skill you want to point to and say, oh, that guy's really good just being a net front guy. I think Bertuzzi's better.
Zach Hyman just had an 83-point season. He's just scored 36 goals.
Playing with Austin Matthews.
Playing with Connor McDavid, yeah.
I'm sorry, playing with Connor McDavid.
But I mean, it is an interesting thought that, okay, Hyman signed, yes, he signed long-term, 7 years, but he's at the same AAV as Tyler Bertuzzi at 5.5. Would you rather have Tyler Bertuzzi or Zach Hyman?
I'd take Bertuzzi all day.
Or even dating back to the last 2 years, you could have had Hyman the last 2 years. Does that make a difference if they had just re-signed Hyman instead of trying to go down all these other routes? Because now you're giving Bertuzzi the same amount as him. So you think that Bertuzzi playing alongside these guys is going to do better than what Hyman would have been able to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's a higher skill guy.
Yeah, I think he's got a higher hockey IQ. I think his skill level is just a little bit better than those guys like you mentioned.
I think he's a little faster too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, top to bottom, this is probably their best forward group that they're walking into a regular season with. Now, they maybe have had really good forward groups into the playoffs because of trades, but as far as the start of a regular season, I don't remember the last time that there was two rookies in the forward group who I was this excited about since, probably Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner walked in. And I'm not saying that Nyes and Minton are going to be Marner and Matthews, but I do think that, this is exactly what you need to win the cup. You need these guys on their ELCs who blow you out of the water. I mean, that's what Chicago seemed to always do when they were winning cups. That's what Pittsburgh was doing when Jake Getzel's coming up on his ELC. Those are the players you need to win Stanley Cups. You need those players who are on their ELCs that can exceed expectations, come up faster than expected, and knock some veteran guys down the lineup a little bit and add speed higher up in the lineup. And I think they have that. I can't say enough about the forward group and the way that it looks. Now, there's some drama, of course, William Nylander and all that, but as far as the construction of it looks, I think they're in... Out of any team in this division, this is the forward group I'm taking.
I don't disagree with you one bit. And, I mean, with William Nylander, I don't think there'll be too much of a distraction. I think, again, the big dog, Austin Matthews, is signed. But I think really what's going to end up playing out is, I think right now you're having, management saying, well, are you really that guy we had last year, right, who could be over a point per game guy and, put up 40 goals? Or are you the guy who, necessarily a few years ago was, a 60-point guy, 70-point guy? What are you, right? Are you going to continue to put up that kind of production? And I think he's going to go out there and say, I'm that 40-goal guy. I'm that point-per-game player. And then he's going to get paid, $9.5, $10 million, whatever it may be. So
as a winger, probably 8.5, $8.5.
Yeah, and I think maybe his camp is sitting there saying, we don't have to rush into this. We can go into the offseason because we'll see where the cap goes and we can figure out how much, money they've got to spend and, take advantage of that a little bit. And, luckily for Toronto, like you mentioned, they've got younger guys like Nyes and Mitten on entry-level deals, so they can afford to do that.
Yep. Yeah, you're not going to trade them. You can't trade them. You have to risk losing them, unfortunately. But yeah, that's really the drama. From a defensive standpoint, you're hoping that Liljegren takes a step. I think you're pleased with Jake McCabe and what he adds to the group for a whole season. And I think it's going to be maybe the biggest question is can TJ Brody hold up between Brody and Giordano? Can these two guys hold up and be as good as they have been in the past for the Leafs? Because Giordano really kind of crumbled in the playoffs, and I think that was a matter of playing him too much when everybody seemingly was hurt on their blue line. So it's going to be finding him those maybe moments through the season where he's not playing quite as much. And then from a roster construction, there's just not as much help on the defensive side. They signed Simon Benoit, but they've got their 7 guys up, and there's not really a whole lot in the minors that you're dying to bring up right now. Other than Connor Timmins, who got hurt, and he'll be back. But
no, but I do think at some point, right, you're going to have injuries. You're going to get some cap relief a little bit that way. But I think at some point, right, Toronto's going to go out and spend a 3rd round pick, maybe a future 5th or whatever, and bring in just a number 6, 7 guy off of a team, like maybe, for example, Detroit, right? An Oli Mata, a guy who, the Wings might look to move at some point, but they'll go in and bring in that guy for the playoffs for sure. Because again, I think down the stretch, especially, come that, that April, that end of March time after the deadline, I think they're going to rest Gio a lot there and get in another guy to, give him a breather so they can have him ready for the playoffs.
Yep. All right, perfect. Where do you have the Leafs finishing?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question they're top of the division. Okay.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this is their year to be top dogs for the first. I think this would be the first time they won the division since 2003 or something like that, or 2002.
Yeah, and I think there'll be a sizable gap. I mean, I'm thinking at least a 10-point spread between them at first and the team at number 2.
Yeah, similar to last year. I mean, Boston was just so far ahead. I don't think the Leafs are winning 65 games.
No,
but Boston was just so much further ahead. I think that it'll be a similar vibe. I think they'll be in command. Speaking of Boston, let's close out our entire preview here with the Boston Bruins, who will lose future Hall of Famer Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, and name Brad Marchand the captain. They go out and they sign Milan Lucic and James Van Riemsdyk to add to their forward group, and their defense group. What Kevin Shattenkirk signs with them, and but largely the rest of the team, kind of coming back from a defensive standpoint. At least you get Lindholm for a whole year, and what do you see going on with the Boston Bruins after losing their top 2 centers?
Boy, I see this being a team where they've got to rely maybe a little too heavily on Pasta to score some goals and Jake DeBrusk, but I think they're going to be a team that's going to just play very, very tight defensively and just win those games 2-1, and they're okay with that. I think at some point, maybe this year, they'll address their center depth issue. Because I don't think a guy like maybe John Beecher, or Morgan Geekie, whomever, Trent Frederick, they put in there at center. That's not a long-term solution. I like Pavel Zacha, but in a number 2 spot, and Charlie Coyle, same in a number 3 spot, but maybe not that number 1. And again, I don't think you'll be able to find yourself a number 1 centerman via trade this season. But
I'm going to tell you where that centerman's going to come from.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it right now.
I think that the Boston Bruins are going to target Elias Pettersson, the Vancouver Canucks, who is unsure if he's going to re-sign with the Canucks, and the Canucks are now unsure if they want to re-sign him. And
I'll tell you what, man, if they can somehow swing, I mean, I don't know if they have the assets to do that, but
I mean, I think they've proven that they can get things done. I mean, you could deal Jake DeBrusk, who would be if he was willing to sign with Vancouver, not a bad piece to include there. I mean, as far as roster players, yeah, it's going to be tough to find a roster player, but I guess picks and prospects would be your route. But I mean, Boston's going to target some good center, and I don't see a center that is potentially available that's better than Pettersson. I got to think he's on their radar. You're right. I don't know if they have everything that they need right now to acquire him, but I think he's going to be big time on their radar.
Okay. Wow. That would be quite the get for them. I mean, that's, obviously, what they ask in return is going to be huge. Do they go after maybe like a Jeremy Swayman, and who knows? Maybe.
Well, and yeah, that would likely have to be, you're probably going to have to include a goalie in there.
Yeah, but that would be huge for Boston if they could get a guy like Elias Lindholm. I mean, I was thinking to me, I think if for some reason, right, you see, Calgary sort of faltering early, and then they decide, okay, we're gonna kind of blow this thing up. Elias Lindholm, I think, would fit in perfectly with this team, with the kind of game that they play. But I mean, Pettersson would be, even a better get in my opinion.
I think maybe an easier get because they're older. You look at like a Logan Couture, you look at Thomas Hertl. If you're able to acquire one of those guys, that would be a good move as well. I could see maybe Hertl fitting better in Boston from a stylistic point and the way that he plays. Pettersson might be a little too flashy for the Bruins. Not enough brawn, but I think. I mean, the Bruins are still good. Like, yeah, they lost 2 centers, but they're still good. They're going to get a center at some point to kind of fill the gap. I don't think that they're a team that is going to like fall too much in the regular season because of how good their defense is. And I think you're right. They're just going to be maybe that boring team to watch. And maybe it's good for them going into the playoffs because they won't have these almost like just otherworldly expectations. This is the last year of Patrice Bergeron. You just set all these records for most wins. You have to win. And they kind of crumbled under those expectations. And I think maybe coming into a year with lower spotlight being on you, that it'll be an easier ride for them. And then I think you get Tampa Bay in the first round, and I think the Bruins could munch through them.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. But, I mean, you look at their production last year, right? Even if they finish with 10 less wins, they're still top of this division. They finish with, they give up 40 more goals. That's still better than the next best team in this division. So there's room for them to falter a little bit. And I think, again, missing guys like Bergeron and Krejci are huge. But ultimately, I still think, like you mentioned, the defense is strong enough, the goaltending is strong enough that they're still going to find a way to finish towards the top of this division.
Yep, there we go. I agree. Yep, number 2 is where I have them, and same. I mean they could go anywhere between 2 and 4. I think they're in the playoffs. But that is our Atlantic Division preview. We hope you enjoyed the entire league and our massive preview we've done over the last month. Enjoy the regular season, and starting next episode, we're actually going to just talk about what's going on in the league. So we'll be back to normal, buzzing along through the regular season. Don't forget, you can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Justin, any final words, thoughts?
I love you.
I love you too. We'll talk to you guys soon.